striking phenomenon in the data is the fractal quality. What's happened in the top 1%, what's relative to the bottom 99%, what's happened in the top 1/10 of a percent relative to the rest of the top 1%, what's happened in the top 1/100th of a percent relative to the top 1/10 of a percent. And economists are only beginning to understand what the forces driving that are, and that's also going to have to be a central and increasing part of economics going forward. I don't think there's any question that these events should force very substantial reformulations in economics. At the same time, I would caution that the fact that there's a lot to which economics has to adapt does not mean that everyone who has said that mainstream economics is wrong has been right, or that every critique that has been offered has validity. So I think we need to be rather careful about throwing out the baby with the bathwater, even as we recognize that any responsible synthesizer of what economics knows or thinks or needs to study will have very substantially revised their views driven by the experience, particularly of the last decade.
In your talk, you mentioned the substantial deleveraging process that is underway or will be going on for many years. The several deficit commissions, the bipartisan one and the Bowles-Simpson one, both recommended deficit reduction starting in fiscal year 2012, which is actually means starting October 2011, when the unemployment rate might still be 9% or so. Do you think that that is too soon to start any kind of deficit reduction plan in light of this strong deleveraging trend?
I think it's the commissions also called for short-run measures to increase demand. Look, I think at the right time to cut wasteful spending where you can identify wasteful spending is now. And then you can make a separate decision about other kinds of investments with the revenues you save, or ways that can be used through the tax and transfer system to maximize spending. So I salute the objective of reducing wasteful spending as soon as possible, even as I tried to make clear in my remarks, I expect that the economy will be demand constrained for several years to come. Believe that only by operating on the demand side can you increase demand, and that the path of fiscal policy and structural deficit is a very important determinant of demand.
Why don't we turn to the press? We'll have people stand up and announce who they are first.
Hi, Stephanie Drew with Fox Business. I'm curious what impact you see the extension of the tax cuts having on GDP growth.
You know, there's been a certain amount of employment of economic forecasters generated in the last several weeks revising their forecasts. And to my knowledge, all the forecasts have been upwards by amounts that run in the 1% range, perhaps slightly lower, perhaps slightly higher. One nuance that some of the commentary has missed is that many of the forecast revisions speak about 2011 relative to 2010. Of course, if you think about 2011 GDP, the average of 2011 GDP is sort of like the GDP in July of 2011. So if, for example, you increase the growth rate by 4% over the course of 2011, the average level of GDP in 2011 would only be increased by 2%. So when people speak of the increment of 2011 over 2010, those often underestimate what the prospective growth rate is going to be going forward. But I would say clearly positive and in the 1% range. The other thing that the bill has done is it has truncated the left tail of possible forecasts. The forecasters who have been revising their forecasts all assumed, or almost all assumed, that the middle class tax cuts would be extended. If the process had broken down and there had not been a tax bill in this session, then the middle class tax cuts would not have been extended. And in that case, you would have seen forecast revisions, but you would have seen a forecast revision in a negative direction. So the change as a consequence of this compromise is greater than the upwards revision in the forecast.
Damien Fletcher with the Wall Street Journal. Both sides are expecting a fight early next year on the debt ceiling issue. Do you think it's going to be addressed individually, or do you think it's going to be part of a broader package? The Republicans are insisting there'll be big spending cuts. They'll have to come along with any of their votes on that.
Economic prognostication is hard. Political prognostication for a time I'm not going to be in office is beyond me. Here's what I do know. It is inconceivable that the United States could allow any serious question to arise with respect to our debt.
Hi, Dan Frumkin with the Huffington Post. This being your last speech in your current office, I was hoping I could encourage you to indulge in a little bit of nostalgia, maybe expressing some regrets. What would you say, for instance, is your...
Nostalgia and regrets are slightly different concepts.
Okay.
They're slightly different concepts usually.
I'll encourage regrets.
I think I'll emphasize nostalgia, and I'll let you emphasize regrets. Go ahead.
Well, yeah, I mean, what do you think was your worst major decision? It's a very minimal risk of
There's
putting
so
words
many
in your
to choose
mouth.
from.
That has something to do with the fact that the last 2 years were much better for big banks than they were for the little guy.
Look, I don't think the President has said many times that none of us can rest or be satisfied with anything like the current level of joblessness, with anything like the income gaps between what people could be earning and what they are earning. So that's where one would like to have seen more rapid progress, even as one I think does need to recognize that relative to what was really very widely feared, the outcome has been a good deal better. But I think one needs to let time pass to fully evaluate the policies that have been put in place. As I tried to make clear, we have a great deal left to do. We have very important problems to solve. But for all of our problems, one looks at the other major industrialized countries in the world, we have a relatively good hand to play, and I remain quite optimistic about the future.
Merrill Vision, Fiscal Times. Anybody who looks at the financial crisis we just came through and say regulation or deregulation clearly was a major factor, if not the major factor. We're about to have a business summit on Wednesday with the president, where business leaders are coming in. And it looks like one of the highest items on their agenda is regulations, deregulation, in order to get the economy moving. Sort of the question becomes, what do you think the role for regulation is in the years ahead? Where are the problems there? And then really regarding the financial sector, do you think the kind of economy that you discussed about what we need to go over the 21st century is going to have a larger or same or perhaps even smaller financial sector moving forward?
Well, I think it's very difficult to predict what will happen over time to the size of the financial sector. I don't think there's any question that vast excess built up in the period from 2001 to 2008. The volume of derivatives trading, for example, was 100 times as large by 2007 as it had been in certain areas, certain of the most dangerous areas of derivatives, as it had been in the late 1990s and 2000. And that's why the implementation of the financial reform bill and its tough-minded implementation is going to be so essential. I said many times in the financial reform debate that it was a profoundly important one, both for the issue of financial reform and for the broader effectiveness of the democracy. That there was $1 million being spent on lobbyists per member of Congress, that enough lobbyists were working on that bill, that every member of Congress could be quadruple team. And if that effort succeeded, it was going to be a very serious thing, not just for what it meant for the future of the financial sector. Well, that effort that went into blocking financial reform has not gone away. It has been turned towards the whole rule writing process. And it is hugely important that that effort not succeed. And we will have to find ways to assure that on the one hand, we bring substantial expertise to bear on these questions of financial regulation. And at the same time, we maintain the kind of objectivity and distance that is essential to successful regulation. And that's going to be one of the very important issues going forward.
Thanks. Danny Zhang from China's Xinhua News Agency. Dr. Summers, my question has two parts. First part for the tax deal. Without tax deal, you think how big is the chance for the U.S. economy slipping back into a recession, as you mentioned, and how much longer would be the demand-constrained period last for longer? Second part of my question is that if my memory doesn't fail me, last year you mentioned that Harvard taught me politics and White House taught me economics. Because this is your outgoing speech, and I wonder, do you still think so, and do you enjoy the time in White House? Thank you.
I think I had said on occasion that I was one of the very few people who came to Washington to get out of politics. I'll stand by that. I'll stand by that statement. With respect to the tax bill, look, I think it's pretty clear that anything that leads to an upwards revision in the forecast leads to a downwards revision in the probability that you would attach to another downturn. And I think there is the further point that there was the risk, and it was a risk that had been growing in forecasters' minds, that somehow none of the tax cuts would be extended. And that would have had extremely serious impacts on the economy and would have had extremely serious impacts on confidence.